Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DePIN podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. We're excited to bring you interviews with the key founders in the DePIN landscape, investors, and ecosystem partners. This is an exciting time for DePIN, and this year we're going to be meeting even more founders learning about the projects that they're building, about the traction they're getting, and about the revenue that they're generating. The podcast is brought to you by Fluence. Fluence is building a decentralized compute platform. It's a project I'm a co-founder of and really excited about. So buckle up for this year. Please subscribe to the channel, listen to us on Spotify or Apple. And of course, if you are around any of the large conferences, come to our DePIN Day, where you can meet these founders on the Fluence team in person and hear from all the ecosystem partners as well. So look forward to seeing you in person, and let's get going on this podcast. Welcome to the DePIN podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. We are coming to you today recording in our fancy studio in Denver, around ETH Denver. So excited to be here and also excited to have the second time guest, Mike Horton from GEODNET. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled you're here. And the reason I think I'm particularly excited to have you on a second time is the amount of progress you guys have made since coming on, almost a year ago. And so I think you guys have done stuff you've announced around recently. You've increased your RTK footprint significantly. The revenue's gone up. So there's a ton of great things to talk about. But first, why don't you remind people who haven't seen the first podcast what GEODNET does?
Yeah, so GEODNET is a DePIN network that operates the world's largest precise positioning network. It's a network of base stations that are actually mining satellite signals. Those satellite signals are processed and used to correct GPS position to centimeter accuracy. So it provides about a 100-fold improvement in accuracy for standard, GPS-based position. This is used and things like robots and drones to provide them high accuracy spatial intelligence.
And so if you think about using GPS, that may have a meter versus you guys 1 centimeter accuracy.
That's right.
Is that right? And the other interesting thing, I think, is there are centralized traditional companies that also perform the same service, but I think you guys have double the amount of positioning kind of nodes versus the centralized competitors.
That's right. Yeah. So we, there are a number of private networks run by companies, a couple of big networks, one run by Trimble, another by Hexagon. There's some state and government networks out there. But we lapped all of those in terms of the size and footprint of our network with now approaching 14,000 registered stations, about 12,000 operating stably. So it's about 2.5 times bigger than the next biggest network for this type of thing on planet Earth. So it's pretty exciting growth.
Well, I mean, what's pretty interesting about that, and you tell me, but it sounds like I attribute that growth to the crypto economics and the crowdsourcing and infrastructure, which meant you didn't have to buy and deploy those stations. So the whole community bought those stations, deployed them, and is earning rewards for that deployment and activation. Is that right?
That's right. It's definitely a crypto economic incentive. It's the fact that it's all happening in parallel. It's not being kind of organized and planned by a central entity, trying to find locations, trying to sign leases, getting permits, and then doing that on a global basis. It's very, very difficult. And DePIN and the token economics around our project have allowed that to happen all in parallel. So at really rapid speed. We're adding this 200 stations a week. That's absolutely unheard of in the field of geospatial, to be able to add that kind of coverage. And it's just worked extremely well.
And what coverage do you need if you're 2.5 times the largest centralized competitor? Where do you need to go to? At what point is there a marginal benefit kind of decline?
Yeah, so we're really getting to a very complete coverage now in the United States and in Europe, including Eastern Europe. There are a few gaps in rural areas in both Europe and the United States, but less and less so. Most every major city is really well covered, like the best coverage of any network in most every major city. We have just tremendously good operating. We get compliments all the time from our customers who use the network, like this is the best, most reliable RTK they've ever seen. So where we need to go next is really, South America. We're working on Southeast Asia, although that coverage there has improved tremendously over the year. We have the biggest best network in India, which is a really exciting market. So Africa is a huge place that we haven't made a ton of progress in most of the countries in Africa. So that's an area to think about. South America, very high priority for us. I think when we get to 20,000 stations, it's kind of game over to some degree, and sense that it's just such a complete network that it's going to be really hard to justify using anything other than GeoDNet for this high accuracy, precise positioning.
Really interesting. And I think, that's already the precision and scale of this network's already playing out. I think, I often talk about revenue for DePIN being so important, and 2025 being your revenue. You're a little ahead of the game in that by generating significant revenue last year. I think it was 2.3 ARR, something along those lines, right?
So we're a little over 3 million ARR right now.
Awesome. And so what kind of customers are buying this data, and where do you see that scaling to?
We have a couple different types of core customers, but certainly drone usage has been tremendous. We announced yesterday Drone Deploy is a new customer. Drone Deploy is flying several thousand flights per week on GeoDNet across North America for like photogrammetry and construction. Energy utilities all use their drone processing software. So that's a really good example. We have a lot of guys in ag, so farmers love GeoDNet. We have a good footprint in North America in farming, both in the Southeast and in the Great Plains states and in California. Also in Europe, we have quite a lot of traction in farming. And then Australia, New Zealand. We also have a lot of companies that are already in GNSS that provide networks today, or buy what we call wholesale data from the network to augment their network, or to even sort of make a next generation network service for their platforms. And that's been a big business for us. So we've worked with Quectel Wireless Solutions, Septentrio, a couple guys I can't name that are in the GNSS marketplace today, use GeoDNet to provide the network data that they need.
And what does this revenue look like? Help people understand what the potential, what the scale. This is a business that is foreign to most, right? This is a very specific business, but I don't think anyone has any sense as to how big it is.
It is pretty big. So there's a public market research study that's put out by the European Space Agency, which runs the Galileo network of satellites. They've done a very detailed job of kind of breaking down all the different existing market segments for what's called GNSS augmentation services, which is what really GeoDNet is. It's the biggest, best, most complete GNSS augmentation system ever built. And they reckon the market size for that, it's in the billions. I forget the exact number. They break it down into like sort of construction, survey, and mapping. And then they have a study on ag. I think in ag, there's like 1 million-ish users. They're paying today on the order of $1,500 to $2,000 a year per ASP. Like John Deere is the most expensive service. Trimble has a service that's in the $1,500 range. We're in that segment. Our average price is probably about $400 a year per customer. And you're looking at the potential for millions of subscribers in that segment alone. We also really focus a lot on new applications. So farming, machine control, construction, survey, these are the traditional markets for precise positioning and RTK. But because our service is the coverage is so good, and we support these very low-cost pieces of silicon that now are even making their way into mobile phone, we have a big focus on enabling consumer applications for precise positioning, including consumer drones, including consumer robots like robotic lawnmowers, including even mobile apps like Pokemon Go style augmented reality apps. And we think there'll be a ton of growth there that's unique to GeoDNet that maybe isn't even covered in these sort of traditional market reports in the space. So that's a good size market. We have, when you look at our station size and our network maturity, and where we're at revenue wise, it's great for DePIN. We look like a leader in DePIN, but we look really tiny in Web 2. And I think that's just because there's just so much room to grow in Web 2. I mean, where it's very new, it's still early days. We've gotten a lot of adoption and a lot of really positive feedback on the network and its performance, but it does take time to grow Web 2 revenue. They do, there's a maturity thing, and they add subscribers to it. There's just a certain physics, and we're going about at the Mach speed limit that physics can support. I mean, I think if you look in the Web 2 customers, they think we're crazy. They're like, how can you possibly have built this fast? And everyone who uses it loves it, but it's still it's gonna grow a lot over the next 5 years. It's gonna be tremendous.
Well, it's terrific. And I think that growth and that revenue you have is what has, driven. You guys have an 80% buy burn. You take 80% of your revenue, you buy your token, you burn it. I've been huge supporters of that model. You can see the impact of that on the token. The token is the only one I'm aware of in the whole 33 million crypto market that's not recently launched, that recently hit an all-time high. And that's a real achievement. And I think that's achievement to the revenue you've generated, but also to the buy burn model.
Yeah.
And I think that what's interesting, and for people to think about, gee, it's gone up, that's great, but that's with 3 million ARR, buying 400,000 a quarter. If you see that revenue 10xing over some period of time, as I'm sure you do, that has massive implications for the token, given that link between them.
Yeah, no, I do think that our emission schedule for the token has been well thought out relative to sort of growing revenue in parallel to growing supply and keeping those in balance. Like, I always use an example of an Airbnb. If Airbnb just put up, or Uber put up a ton of supply and there were no demand, like the network would really break. So you do have to kind of keep these things correlated. And we use the halving schedule. We use the hex rules around emissions, like the first mover in a hex can earn an NFT, so they can lock in a long-term token reward stream for their station, but other people who come in later will split. And so as more people come in, we're not emitting too many tokens and generating too much supply. Everything has to sort of stay in balance over a long period of time for the network to be successful. And I think our tokenomics are working very well. I think the true burn, like a lot of people buy back and burn, but they actually put it in escrow, or they put it back into the mining pool. That's actually a fairly different model than our model, where we actually burn. Like, we send those tokens that get bought back go to the null address, which means our total supply of tokens is continually decreasing.
And what I think you also may take for granted, but you shouldn't in Web3, a lot of people mention and have big revenue numbers that they articulate, but there's no audits, there's no transparency, and you don't really know. The way to know is by looking on chain and seeing tokens bought and burned. And that, to me, that verification deserves a premium, right? Versus someone that didn't even claim any amount of revenue they want, but actually seeing tokens burn is like the clearest verification of that possible. So I think that clearly deserves a premium. I think we'll get a premium in the sector as well.
Super. Yeah, another thing we're doing on the chain side, we have a new GIP that we're working on for high performance mining that's going to have no new net emissions, but it's going to really create a bonus pool. It's going to sort of take from miners that are not performing very well, that aren't delivering a good SLA, that can't really be used by customers. And then take those tokens that would have been rewarded to them under the old scheme, and then kind of move them to miners who are being used by customers that are performing really well over a period of time. So it's sort of delayed reward mechanism. This is a GEODNET improvement proposal that I think is pretty exciting. It's come up by the community to help us drive up the reliability and SLA of the network higher. And I think that'll be super well appreciated by our Web 2 customers. Same time, it'll really incentivize really properly running stations. And when we do that, we're going to put on chain the usage of each individual station. So that'll be really interesting. It'll be a new thing on chain you can see, which is which stations are being used by customers and when. And we do see in North America and Europe, where we have the biggest revenue customer base today, that a huge percentage of the stations that are good quality stations that are delivering are being used every day. So that'll be a fun thing to see, that this DePIN network, that the supply is being really actively consumed all the time.
And it's just transparency to validate that this is actually being used.
Yes.
And I think that every sector which gets hot, there's inevitably people that take advantage of that in sort of unethical ways. And the more transparency you can provide, the better. And I think that sounds terrific. And as evidence of this, I think you guys recently announced a round that Multicoin led, which is great to see.
Yes, indeed. So Multicoin led a round, a strategic round, $8 million in. Also Parify and DACM participated. We have some new product stuff that I'm not quite ready to talk about that we're going to use that money for, that is going to be a huge unlock for the whole entire industry of robots and drones.
Well, Multicoin has led our Series A as well, so I'm at Fluence. So glad that they're invested in you guys as well. That is terrific. And Can't wait to see those. It sounds like you're teeing yourself up for a three-peat on the podcast at some point,
Yes,
as well
indeed.
as when this stuff gets
So
announced.
we're going to be doing some stuff in the robotics space in particular. It's really, really cool.
Well, excellent.
Really, I think robotics is ready for prime time right now. Never before in my career. I've been working in sensors my whole career and never already seen a period where everything is coming together to bring mass market robotics to bear to the world.
Well, and then it's actually worth talking about that at DePIN Day. Mike also has spoken at 2 different DePIN Days, and you spoke yesterday, and you had a robot on stage. Can you talk to us a little bit about robotics, sort of big picture, and kind of what the insight is there? Because I know that's a bunch of your background.
Yeah, so I think that the big barrier to having kind of mass market robotics hit the street is a lot of it's been sort of the cost of the sensors, the cost of the processing, as well as maturity of AI. And also some of the use cases were maybe not quite ready. I think all of that's changed, and there's between tariffs and higher labor costs, more regulations, there's an actual stronger and stronger sort of end user demand for industrial and consumer robots. And then the cost of the sensors, such as complementary sensors to what we do, like LiDAR, GEODNET itself, being able to provide precise positioning at global scale and a reasonable cost. It's just now happening, and that's going to enable mass market robotics to happen. Humanoids are the ones that I think everyone's most excited about these days. They're kind of the apex predator of these robots. They have a big set of use cases that I think are going to be very interesting. We have, I think, another podcast that came out today with one of our customers that does do some stuff in humanoids, as well as with the dogs, as well as with drones. And then I do think for every humanoid, there are going to be a lot of minion robots. And these things a lot of them are there today, but I think the use cases and there's a kind of opening up of people's minds that you can go beyond a Roomba. They're more useful robots than just a Roomba.
Well, I think that's actually where the gap is, because people see the Roomba and they think of a humanoid that is doing fully functional human tasks, and that seems far away. The in-between is this white space that's a little harder to conceptualize, besides like an Amazon warehouse type thing. So what sort of in-between?
Well, we certainly have the robotic lawnmowers are becoming quite mass market. Hundreds of thousands of those are shipping now. Maybe this year it'll hit 1 million units a year. Drones, which are really robotic platforms, and they've gotten very sophisticated. Those are experiencing very, very successful use cases, from consumer to security to mapping to just a lot of drone delivery. Definitely starting to happen. Texas is just starting to do drone delivery flights, and most of these newer applications want precise localization. If you're going to do any sort of return to home function, we have some cool videos out on YouTube. One with the DJI. We have one coming out with one of our American drone partners that just show the difference in return to home performance when you have RTK versus not. So when you have RTK, you can return the drone to literally the exact place it took off for, which is super useful for novice pilots. It's also super useful for drone in the box type of applications. Another big thing is just the flyability of the drone. So if you have winds and you don't have RTK, and you're up above, the cameras, even the downward looking cameras on the drone, they can't really hold a tight hover. So if you're trying to take good photography, it's, your stuff's moving around. You have RTK, that drone sits in a golf ball size holding pattern, regardless of the winds. And it makes just everything much easier to operate.
Super interesting. Very interesting. What, tell us about the challenges. You guys have scaled your number of devices significantly. You've generated revenue. What do you think what's held you back, but what hasn't gone? It sounds like things have gone great, but there must have been some things that
yeah. So a couple of things I think that are tough is you have to work really hard on reliability. I think that this is something that customers get nervous about. Hey, this is a different type of network, the structure. Even they're not thinking about the tokens, they just think about the structure of the network and how it was built. How do they get assurances of the reliability of that? We've worked very transparently on that. We have more data today available about our network than any of the competitive networks in terms of station location, in terms of their online rate, in terms of the satellite signal performance. We have this thing called our QC database that has all of the metrics for multipass, cycle subs, all these low-level detailed metrics completely transparently available to our enterprise customers that no other network has. So we have to overcome both a real sort of, there are differences in the network topology, and that you do not have, you quote, don't have control over every individual site like you do in a centralized one. But the centralized thing's a mirage, right? You put the station up on a building, the centralized company owning that, they don't own the tower, they don't own the building. So there's still a lot of stuff out of their control. They don't own the power grid, but the perception is that it'll be less reliable. So we have to overcome that in people's minds. And that's a pretty good challenge to take on. We've taken it on from a very technical perspective, just trying to demonstrate performance and then letting people use the network for free at first. And we've done a lot of that. That's a very, very good sales technique. We just let people use it, and then they love it. And then that resolves. They may have had questions, but because they didn't take any risk up front to try it out, even at some scale, we let people use it for free to start. That resolves a lot of the objections.
But the risk of a device going offline is power or bandwidth. It's not like there's the thing that's interesting about it is once you install it, you just have to ensure
power and bandwidth,
and that doesn't. It's not a high maintenance device.
No, it's not a high maintenance device, but power and bandwidth is a real thing, right? I mean,
especially in South America, potentially.
South America is very challenging. Africa is even more challenging. Even in the U.S., there are power outages. They happen. California seems to get its fair share anyway. So these are things that we're working on, like our new device that we've that does both the GEODNET and the wing bits. That device has dual internet connections in it. It also has a potential for a SIM card to be put in it, or a 4G card to be put in it, which would give it a redundant internet connection. And it's low power, so it's easy to battery back it up, or easy to battery plus solar back it up. And these are things that we will probably introduce more tokenomic incentives to push the reliability up more and more and more.
Interesting. And so for people particularly, it sounds like, either parts of Asia or South America, where do they go to figure out if they're where they live or where they work, or if their businesses are situated appropriately for a device?
You can look at our console map and just figure out where the empty hexes are. You can put a GeoDNet up really just about anywhere. The only places that there are a few countries where we don't allow people to put up miners because of geospatial laws that make it illegal to operate what are called GNSS reference stations without special permits. The most notable of those locations is China. So you won't find GeoDNet miners in China. So you can mine anywhere. I think you want to go to an empty hex because that's where you can lock in the rewards, right? If you go to a hex that's already kind of crowded, you're going to get, and you don't, you're late to the hex, you're not going to do that well on rewards. If you go to an empty hex, you can earn an NFT, which will protect you. You don't have to ever worry about who comes in next.
That's great.
So it's a good model.
And that sounds like there are more of those empty hexes in South America.
Oh, yes. And we've been incentivizing South America with what we call our Stake Super Hex program, where we have we lock some tokens through a staking program to then unlock tokens for a miner up to 2x or 4x the normal rewards, made to incentivize coverage in certain areas. We've been doing that very aggressively right now in Brazil. We have at least, I think, 4 customers that want to hit it in Brazil. And Brazil's tough because they have like 100% tariffs on hardware, and it's big and everything's far apart. So I think it's, makes sense that this is a region where the incremental cost to deploy hardware is just higher. We have demand for it. So we've created incentives in the network, decentralized incentives in the network that then attract miners in. And we've been growing our coverage in Brazil.
Excellent.
So that's good.
Well, listen, I got to make sure this podcast gets viewed by a whole network of people I know in Brazil. So I want to be saying to them for sure. No doubt. Well, that's great. Any other announcements that's come up recently that you want to highlight?
I think that, stay tuned for a lot of things that we're going to be doing in the robotics space. That's really the key thing for us.
Excellent. Listen, it's great to see the progress you guys have made. I think you're setting a standard for DePIN where you're providing a better service than centralized competitors, a more rolled out service, a higher quality service at a cheaper price than centralized competitors. And that's what every DePIN should aspire to. It's a model for DePIN, and your token reflects it. So that's great to see, and I believe it's just the beginning. So thrilled to have you on, and look forward to having you on for a third time, once Brazil is rolled out.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Tom, for having me, and thanks for all the work you do to put on all the cool events and everything.
Excellent. Well, listen, appreciate it. We'll have you again. Thanks, Mike.
Super.
The DePIN Podcast, the place where we explore real-world use cases unlocked by crypto. That's all for today. Thanks for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us grow. Add a like, add a comment. And of course, if you have anyone you think we should be talking to or have on this podcast, either leave a comment there or reach out. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.